Poštovani gledaoci, dobrodošli u još jedno izdanje emisije Granice Istoka. Ja sam Harun Karčić. Nakon 3,5 godine tenzija, Saudijska Arabija, Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati, Bahrein i Egipat normalizirali su diplomatske odnose sa Katarom. Zemlje će uskoro imenovati ambasadore, nastaviti sa trgovinom i investicijama i ponovno uspostaviti direktne aviolinije između tih država. Ipak, Katar je odbio prihvatiti 13 zahtjeva koje su mu postavile te 4 države jer su graničili sa potpisivanjem kapitulacije. Njegova ekonomija i vojska snažnije su nego ikad, kao i savezništvo Dohe i Ankare. U ovoj emisiji analiziramo budućnost Vijeća za saradnju zaljevskih zemalja, kao i odnose tih država sa Turskom i Iranom. Prije razgovora sa našim gostima, pogledajmo uvodni prilog.
Nakon više od 3 godine, od kad su Saudijska Arabija, Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati, Bahrein i Egipat uveli blokadu Kataru, ostvaren je napredak.
Večeras je postignut sporazum o otvaranju kopnenih i morskih granica između Kraljevine Saudijske Arabije i države Katar.
Izjava Kuvajćana uoči samita Vijeća za suradnju zemalja zaljeva u Saudijskoj Arabiji nije iznenađenje. Od početka krize, oni su posrednici između duboko podijeljenih članica vijeća. Sjedinjene Američke Države također su pozvale države zaljeva da riješe spor kako bi se održala stabilnost i sigurnost regije. Suparništvo i razlike u vanjskoj politici desetljećima su izazivale podjele. Ali kad se to pogoršalo 2017. godine, malo tko je očekivao takvu krizu u regiji i nametanje kopnene, zračne i morske blokade Kataru. Bahrein, Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati, Saudijska Arabija i Egipat zatvorili su svoj zračni prostor za katarske zrakoplove, prizemljivši stotine letjelica Katar Airwaysa. Te zemlje zatvorile su i veleposlanstva u Dohi, te potjerale katarske diplomate. Ispostavili su popis sa 13 zahtjeva za koje su rekli da ih Doha mora ispuniti, uključujući zatvaranje kanala Al Jazeera.
Pozitivni aspekt blokade je to što je Katar iz nje izašao snažniji. Posljednjih godina stanovnici Katara pronašli su načine za život pod blokadom. To im je pomoglo da otkriju bolje i efikasnije načine da što ekonomičnije žive i rade, što je rezultiralo snažnijom nezavisnošću zemlje, a da Katar nije morao pristati ni na jedan od 13 iracionalnih zahtjeva.
Utjecaj koji je kriza imala na Vijeće za suradnju zemalja u zaljevu neupitan je. Iako razlike između članica vijeća ostaju, postoji i nada da bi napredak u odnosima mogao biti postignut dijalogom.
Idemo sada do Washingtona gdje se nalazi Dania Thafer, direktorica organizacije Međunarodni zaljevski forum. Dr. Dania, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now let me start by asking you, after the Al Ula meeting, relations between Doha, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Manama and Cairo have been restored, but none of the 13 demands by the blockading quartet have been met. Is this a cold peace for the sake of Gulf unity?
I think it could be viewed as a necessary piece. There has been an overarching trend towards regionalized security arrangements related to the transition in America's leadership and the perceived withdrawal of Washington from the Middle East. Also, the Gulf states are reeling from low oil prices and a difficult economic situation. And I think at this point, the calculation is that cooperation is probably more economically rewarding than confrontation. Furthermore, even though Qatar did not agree to any of the quartet's initial demands, I think Saudi Arabia found that lifting the blockade has nonetheless been politically rewarding. With regards to U.S.-Saudi relations, the Al Ula agreement serves as a win-win for Riyadh's relations with both the outgoing and incoming U.S. administrations. I do believe that Joe Biden's election victory provided an impetus for the Saudis' decision to seek rapprochement with Qatar.
But how different do you think President Joe Biden will be towards the Gulf compared to Donald Trump?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do believe that the Saudi leadership does have merit to be concerned that a Biden administration will be challenging to them, at least rhetorically. And there are some policies that could be concerning from Saudi's perspective, especially the fact that with a Democratic majority in both the upper and lower chambers of Congress, Biden's pledge to end U.S. support for Saudi military intervention in Yemen, and he's also mentioned human rights issues. I don't think that his push on those issues will meet any opposition in Congress. However, Saudi has always remained this paradox for any American administration, especially for the foreign policy team. On the one hand, the U.S. has important strategic interest vested in the kingdom, yet it often collides with what would be typified as American values. However, if history offers any insight into how President-elect Biden will behave, I suspect nothing would fundamentally change in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. And now, moving on to Saudi-UAE relations, there is clearly a rift between the Saudis and Emiratis. One is Yemen. We've seen that militias loyal to the UAE have taken control of the southern parts of the country, leaving the Saudis with an unresolved war with the Houthis in the north. A second source of tensions is Israel. We've seen the UAE try to pitch itself as Israel's main Gulf partner. What lies beneath this rift between the two?
There are reports stating that relations between both countries, especially as a function of the Yemen war, has gone, I guess, from a state of satisfaction and gratitude to a state of confusion and division. And these are what these reports say. Yet this is not completely verified information. It wouldn't be surprising. Yet it's still unclear if there's a rift, like you said, or a mere disagreement. I would like to add that, the threat perception of Saudi Arabia is very different than that of UAE.
In what sense?
I'm sorry?
In what sense?
UAE views Turkey as its primary threat, whereas Saudi views Iran as its primary threat. And I think it would be difficult for both UAE and Saudi to maintain rivalry with both Iran and Turkey. And so I think that plays out in regional conflicts as well.
But has this reconciliation, Gulf reconciliation, strengthened the hand of the Doha-Ankara alliance?
Well, I think that the Doha-Ankara alliance has been strong. Of course, it offers an opportunity, I think, for some sort of, back channel talks between countries that have tension with Turkey, namely Saudi Arabia. I think that the norming of relations with Saudi is more likely than UAE, of course. And Qatar has expressed its readiness to mediate between Saudi and Turkey. The Al-Ula declaration is important because it effectively signals Riyadh's abandonment of the blockading quartet's 13 demands, which included a demand to close the Turkish military base in Qatar. So it does remove an obstacle for rapprochement with Turkey. And also it's noteworthy to mention that in November of 2020, there was a phone call between King Salman and the Turkish president to discuss Saudi-Turkish relations. And I believe that's a first step. I think both Turkey and Saudi will benefit from the reconciliation process, both politically and economically. Although the UAE's tone has showed some slight de-escalation, it's still preliminary to tell whether, if at all, the Al-Ula agreement would really affect UAE-Turkey relations.
Right, and Dr. Dania, finally, the Turkey-Qatar alliance has been at odds with the KSA, UAE, Egypt front in many places. In Somalia, we have seen Turkey and Qatar support the legitimate government in Mogadishu, while the UAE supported the secessionist movement in Somaliland. In the case of Libya, we've seen Qatar and Turkey support the internationally recognized government in Tripoli, while UAE, KSA and Egypt support General Haftar. Similarly in Yemen and their stance vis-a-vis Israel. Will their divergent policies still remain as such in the foreseeable future?
I think that the GCC needs to consider that each country has their own threat perceptions and own foreign policy. Really, I believe moving forward, if the GCC wants to exist as a bloc and be a successful bloc, there needs to be a sort of relations that mirrors the EU, where where all the states cooperate with each other but have their independent foreign policy. I see it impossible that they can resolve every foreign policy issue just because they're in the same bloc and to be aligned with their interests. Each country borders different nations. Each country has their own threats, both domestic and in the region. And so it's unsustainable, really, for them to align in all their foreign policies.
Right, Dr. Dania, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Zemlje zaljeva su izuzetno bogate, veliki su izvoznici energenata, kupci zapadne vojne opreme i bliski saveznici SAD-a. Više detalja u nastavku. Idemo sada do Pariza gdje se nalazi Joe Macaron, politički analitičar i stručnjak za američko-arapske odnose. Joe, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, let me start by asking you, if you look retrospectively at the GCC crisis, what's behind this reconciliation? I mean, is it Kuwaiti efforts at mediating? Is it American pressure? Or did the Saudis and Emiratis simply realize that they can no longer hold this blockade against their immediate neighbor, Qatar?
I think it's a combination of factors. First, the Trump term is over. I think the Saudi leadership got to a new calculation that this crisis no longer serve its interest. It has to be a new start with the Biden administration. So the Saudi leadership is trying basically to diffuse a lot of regional tension to avoid any potential diplomatic confrontation with the Biden administration. Second, I think all the parties involved have depleted their resources during this crisis, and they need to have some normalcy, to have more investment, think about more how to pass the period of the economic impact of the coronavirus. Qatar has the World Cup coming up. So I think all the factors involved, I think they got to a point since a while now that they won't get to anywhere. They had the truce for a while. At least in the media. So I think all these factors eventually led to this timid resolution of the Gulf crisis.
But this is not the first time that a crisis erupted within the GCC. The last one was in 2014. There was an earlier one in 2010. There are still some fundamental differences in the way Qatar runs its foreign policy compared to how the Emiratis and the Saudis run theirs.
I think this is going to continue moving forward. I think each of those three countries wants to have their own independent foreign policy. The UAE is becoming more independent from Saudi Arabia. Qatar is the same. So they have their own now ideological differences, foreign policy priorities, and they have their own investment also to advance those interests. I think this is going to continue moving forward. There will be a minimal coordination, I think, between the three sides on different issues in the Middle East. And they have maybe to find a way to coexist in this way without confrontation, without basically running over each other somehow, as they did in post-2011. And we will see how they're going to coexist. It all depends on what the Biden administration will do. There are different factors now. We have the normalization between the UAE and Israel. We have new priorities for Saudi Arabia moving forward. Same for Qatar. So I think they have many conflicting agenda moving forward, and they'll have to find a way not to run over each other.
But do you see Turkey as mending its ties with the Saudis, Emiratis, Egyptians anytime soon? Some analysts have hinted that Doha might in fact be playing a mediating role between Turkey and the rest.
There was always a line open kept between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. We have mutual investment, economic investment. President Erdogan kept some contact with the Saudi king. So I think those are going to continue moving forward. It's very interesting that both Saudi Arabia, Saudi leadership and Turkish leadership are trying to diffuse tension. We saw Turkey mending fences with Israel. We saw attempts to bridge between Turkey and the difference between Turkey and Qatar. I think in the post-Trump administration, all the parties involved are trying basically to change a little bit the dynamic, to change the confrontation that happened since 2011. But there's still some lingering issues. They're going to continue moving forward. As I mentioned, ideological differences, foreign policy priorities, economic priorities. And you're going to continue to see maybe this alliance between Saudi Arabia and its allies with Turkey and also its allies. But I think it's going to be less confrontation as we saw in the past few years. We see now Qatari investment in Egypt. We see more Turkey talking to Saudi Arabia in a more official way. And this is going to continue moving forward. I don't see we're going to see the same stark confrontation we saw in the past few years.
But if you bear in mind that Qatar did not fulfill any of the 13 demands by the blockading quartet, would you argue that, in fact, Doha, with the help of Ankara, has won this crisis?
I mean, Qatar definitely can play a role. I think first we should give some space for Saudi Arabia and Qatar to build trust. As you know, that Saudi Arabia has asked Qatar not to have Turkish troops on its territories. So if there's direct talks between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, this will help Qatar ease the pressure in dealing with Saudi Arabia moving forward. So I think there's a lot of moving factors in the coming days and years. But I think before Qatar plays a mediation role, they have to use the coming months to build this trust with Saudi Arabia. And we'll see. I think it all depends also on the Biden administration. The way it goes, this will impact the calculation of Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Israel. I think everybody is in waiting mode. What will Biden do? And then I think they will decide based on that how their interests will be aligned, how their alliances will be formed. And I think we are in a transformative period now where things can move east and west, north and south in different ways depending on what Biden will do.
Right, and if you remember back in 2014 during the last Gulf crisis, as Qatar and the Saudis were mending their ties, the United Arab Emirates still retained a very hardline position towards Doha, and it tried on a number of occasions to scuttle the Qatari-Saudi rapprochement. How do you explain the UAE's harsh stance towards Doha?
I mean, obviously, the UAE sees Qatar as the main competitor, and they are both trying to influence Saudi policy and to be more closer now to Saudi Arabia. And this is going to continue moving forward. The Saudi leadership in the recent months and even years took some distance from the Emirati leadership. We saw that in Saudi Arabia. We saw that on Israel. Normalization, we saw them on different files. So I think the dynamics compared to early 2017 have changed now. And I think those players have to find, as I said, a way to interact or not to run over each other at least. I don't see going back to the full confrontation between Emirati and Qatar, but they will still have their differences, their conflict of interest. And this is going to continue moving forward. And I think Saudi Arabia will have to basically position themselves in this post-crisis, where in this new GCC reality, where all those main GCC players are not confronting each other. They have minimal coordination, and they can coexist with each other in some form or another. And I think this will be most probably the new reality until we have maybe a next round of crisis.
Right. And finally, when you look at the wider Middle East, we see Turkey and Qatar supporting the government in Tripoli, while the UAE and Egypt and the Saudis support General Khalifa Haftar. We see differences when they approach towards Somalia and the UAE support towards the secessionists in Somaliland. Do you think their divergent foreign policies will remain as such in the coming years?
I think they will continue in some way, maybe not in the same confrontation mode, but they have conflict of interest. I think Turkey has its own maritime interests, have its own national security interests, and also others in the UAE and Qatar and different players have different mechanisms. But I think there was a missing U.S. leadership role in those conflicts that should return, that they try to bring all those actors together in Libya, in Somalia, basically to manage those conflicts, avoid things to spiral of control, to have ISIS or other terrorist groups to emerge. Some form of UN-sponsored conference should be moving forward. There's some hopes maybe at some point in Libya that should be restored. So I think they can continue to have conflicting interests, but they should be managed in a way that helps resolving those conflicts, not serve the interests of the powers involved. And that's going to be a difficult balancing act, and it needs and it requires, I think, a very strong U.S. leadership moving forward.
Right. Joe Macaron, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you once again for your time.
Thank you.
Zemlje zaljeva blisko vežu porodični, plemenski, trgovinski i politički odnosi. Kriza koja traje od 2017. godine znatno je narušila međusobno povjerenje i ekonomske veze, ali sada izgleda da te iste zemlje koje su nametnule blokadu spremne su ponovo sarađivati. Istovremeno, odnosi Dohe i Ankare su bolji nego ikad jer je Turska bila jedna od rijetkih zemalja koja je stala uz Dohu tokom krize i čak poslala vojsku da zaštiti Katar. Poštovani gledalci, bilo je to sve u ovom izdanju emisije Granice Istoka. Ako ste propustili bilo koji dio, emisiju možete pogledati na našoj web stranici balkans.aljazeera.net. Hvala na pažnji.